Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron Channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, we're going to ask the question, what are the biggest two muscle groups in the upper body, and are you working them hard enough? Before I get into this topic, if you guys would like a custom workout during December, the end of the year, they are only $29.99. I have them on discount. You can check out the link down below. You can also check out a link to all my Black Friday or December savings. All right, so I'm going to put up a graphic here, and I have the little handy-dandy cheat card of the graphic. Basically, it is looking at the largest muscle groups of the upper body, and they aren't what you think. I was surprised a little bit. Even after 40 years of lifting and helping endless number of lifters and coaching, I was surprised a little bit by this information, and I learned something, so I hope you will learn something as well. We're going to take a look at all of the largest muscle groups of the upper body and make some commentary about some possible adjustments to your upper body training. All right, so you can see the graphic, and when we think about the upper body, which muscle groups, I want you to ask yourself, which muscle groups do you generally consider to be the largest? It's probably not the two at the top of the list. The two at the top of the list are the deltoid and the triceps, and right below it, kind of equal, is the pec major. And in the fourth position, the lats. These aren't exactly probably the exercises we think of. You might think of the chest as being one of the biggest, and a lot of people might think of the biceps, but the biggest muscle groups in this list are the delts, the triceps, and outside of the pec, we're looking at the lats. Now, if you work your way down the list, there are kind of four that are the next here: the subscapularis, the biceps, the brachialis, and the infraspinatus. I think of this entire list, the biggest thing that surprises me was the deltoids and the triceps and the subscapularis. Now, the reason that surprised me is because that is a rotator cuff muscle, and we will get into that in a little bit. So if you want a big upper body, most guys are hitting the gym and they're hitting their chest, they're hitting their biceps, and kind of hitting their back is kind of a secondary area of focus, hitting their shoulders is kind of a secondary area of focus, and hitting their triceps as a secondary area of focus to their biceps. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a reasonable amount of chest volume and bicep volume, and even things like the barbell rows and the pendlay rows, for your overall back thickness. But if you want size on the upper body and you want well-rounded size, we have to shift things a little bit and make sure we are hitting our shoulders properly, our triceps properly, and our lats properly. And I will add into that, we probably want to make sure we're doing a little bit of rotator cuff rehab or prehab. I've started to do that lately. And I'm going to be honest, it was a big hole in my training. I didn't even think about it much until I got into jiu-jitsu the last 3 months. Now, do you have to do this sort of thing? Do you have to work the rotator cuff? Well, that's up for debate, but it's probably not a bad decision to do a little bit of rotator cuff rehab and prehab so we can keep that area strong. So let's talk about the delts and the triceps first. These are big areas that are generally underworked by the average lifter. I'm going to say something, and you guys that have been watching my channel for a long time know my feelings on this. When it comes to developing big delts, you need to have a battery of overhead presses in your weekly or bi-weekly programming. If you want big delts, you're not going to build them using side lateral raises alone. You need some form of overhead pressing. Balance out your horizontal pressing or your bench pressing type of movements with vertical pressing or overhead pressing. Yes, both of those exercises or movement patterns hit the front delts, and the front delts are a big part of your delt size. But the overhead press also substantially hits your side delts, no matter what the chaos or silly chatter is on the internet. My clients that do overhead pressing experience solid side delt pumps. They are an integral part of the overhead pressing movement. Now, I recommend doing a barbell and dumbbell overhead press at least every other week. If you want to do them in the same week, that's great. If you can toss in a shoulder or machine shoulder press as well, that is awesome. But you should be doing at least a dumbbell or barbell overhead press every week. So if you can do a behind the neck press, consider doing that movement. That's absolutely fine. If you don't like doing a push press or military press, do them seated, because seated presses have a lot of value. You add stability. Generally, you can use a little bit more weight when you are doing a seated press because of that stability and that focus. And they are going to be a little bit more lower back friendly. And there's nothing wrong with taking care of our lower back. I have always preferred the seated overhead press. I've gotten my behind the neck press strict to 315 and my seated front press to 315. So I got both of those movement patterns to 315 pounds for 1 rep max. Now, even though I love the barbell overhead press, the seated barbell overhead press, my passion really has been the dumbbell overhead press. And over the years, I have liked to maybe switch that a little bit every other week with the Arnold press. You don't have to do that, but just know the Arnold press is a solid option as well. So if you want big shoulders, you have to embrace those overhead presses. Go in and get a seated overhead press. Even if you don't like the seated, do a military or even a push press variation, but get one of those in, one of those barbell movements at least every other week. And hey, if you don't like the barbell, do it on a Smith. There's nothing wrong with doing a Smith machine overhead. That's perfectly fine. If you are going to do a Smith overhead, I highly recommend doing a seated dumbbell overhead press at least every other week. So bottom line, training the shoulders, getting a big upper body, you want your compound movements, your vertical pressing. The shoulders are the biggest muscle group in the upper body. Now let's move on to your triceps. When it comes to building big arms, and everybody wants big arms, we have a tendency, it goes without saying, we have a tendency to focus on the biceps, but the triceps basically are 65 to 70% of your arm mass. You need to hammer the triceps. Now, there are a lot of quality triceps exercises. You can do cable extensions, overhead extensions. You can do seated press downs. You can do JM presses. You can do close grip benches. You can do single arm dumbbell overheads. You can even do kickbacks or machine extensions. Tons of great triceps exercises. And you want in your weekly programming a lot of stress on those triceps. Now, the key in all this is to find triceps exercises that don't beat up your elbows. Triceps exercises more than anything, and we're not talking about elbow tendonitis here. We're talking about general elbow joint stress. Triceps exercises more than anything, more than chest pressing or shoulder pressing or biceps work, have a tendency to beat up the elbows. So don't worry so much about which triceps exercises you have in the mix. Focus on using triceps exercises that treat your elbow good. If you get into the gym and you can't do extensions for whatever reason because they bother your elbow, don't lose any sleep over it. Don't worry about it. Just use triceps exercises that treat that elbow good. If you're training 4 days a week, it's probably a good idea to have 9 sets specifically for your triceps, at minimum 6. Now, looking back at this list, we're not going to worry about pecs too much because we all know we need to bench press and maybe do some dips and dumbbell press, incline dumbbell press, and all that kind of stuff. You probably have your pecs squared away. I'm going to talk about the lats a little bit, and then we'll finish talking about the rotator cuff. Working the lats can be very, very difficult. I've made videos on this over the years. Basically, you have a couple different types of movement patterns when it comes to working your back. And this is a generalization, but it's a good way to remember things. You have your vertical row. Now, your vertical rows are things like pendlay rows and dumbbell rows, seated cable rows and machine rows and T-bar rows. You have a lot of vertical row action, a lot of vertical row exercise choices. Things where you're pulling the bar kind of in that opposite pattern of the bench press, where instead of pushing away from the chest, you're pulling the bar towards your chest. You have a lot of exercise choices for this horizontal row. And all of these exercise choices have a big progression opportunity. There's a lot of room to get them big and strong and really build up overall back thickness. Now, when you do the opposite of a vertical press, which is a vertical pull, you are a little bit more limited. You have things like the lat pull down and pull-ups. You can do things like a machine pullover if you have access to that, or a dumbbell pullover, even an isolation movement like a lat prayer. But overall, when it comes to that vertical pulling movement, a lot of people can't do pull-ups really well, either because of weight or they just aren't built really solidly for them. It's just not a natural lift for them. Now, I'm not telling you not to do your pull-ups. One of my biggest regrets over the years was that I didn't try to train my pull-ups as hard as I could when they started to get difficult. So if you can get in some pull-ups, get in some pull-ups. Just work on them. Be patient with them. I know it can be frustrating, but you want to get after them. You want to be patient with them. But understand that it's going to be a long game with your pull-ups, and it can be a very frustrating lift. You want to add to that equation the lat pull down if you can. I like varying between a wider grip and a V-handle. A V-handle, I can really drive my elbows towards my hips and get a lat feel. But between these two lifts, they can be frustrating because the pull-ups can be very difficult to progress on for most of us. And then the lat pull down, once you get into those early intermediate years of lifting, you're going to kind of hit a soft wall with your lat pull down, meaning it's going to become very hard to progress. So the lat pull down is a lift that you'll move up on pretty regularly or substantially during your first 2 years of lifting, or first 18 months of lifting, or 12 months of lifting. And then you're going to hit a hard wall, or a soft wall, I should say, where it just becomes very difficult to progress. So I want you to keep these movement patterns in. I want you to keep pull-ups in if you can. I want you to keep lat pull downs in if you can, but understand they're going to be very frustrating, and you want to build up the lats, right? Because they are one of the biggest muscle groups. Here is something to remember. Keep a couple exercises in for your lats, but always understand that your horizontal pulling, your horizontal rowing, your big beefy exercises like the dumbbell rows and the T-bar rows and the seated cable rows and the machine rows and the seal rows, they're also going to work the lats to varying degrees because it is a compound movement. In the bodybuilding, muscle building world, we dumb things down so much that we put these lifts into a body part box and pretend like lat pull downs only hit the lats, and somehow the horizontal rows, like dumbbell rows, only hit things like the rhomboids and only build back thickness but not lat thickness. This is absolute nonsense. Don't panic if you suck at pull-ups. Don't panic if your lat pull-downs are frustratingly slow. Just continue to attack both of those exercises and crush your horizontal rows. One final note, I would probably recommend doing a couple of exercises, just prehab or rehab or whatever, for your rotator cuff. As you can see, the subscapularis is number 5 on this list. Lately, I have been doing things like a Cuban press where you rotate up and then press up. I actually purchased a club from Kensui Fitness, and I have no affiliation with them. I've been doing club swings for my rotator cuff as well. So don't rule out things like this. They don't have a huge time investment, but they can provide a lot of value for the time you are investing. Before you go, check out this video on your seated overhead press. It will help you understand the positioning and why you need to angle your seat back just a little bit. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.